Mics are hot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Anyhow,
Well, let's go ahead and get this started. We've been missing a couple of people, but they might wander in. Kelly, are you running this show?
Well, technically, it's going to be Scott Stoffer, but I did just want 1 minute before we keep going. So a couple of us have to leave early. There's a planning commission meeting tonight. So for people watching, that's why Robert and I will be heading out, as well as Denny, for the next meeting tonight, and that'll be back at City Hall. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and let him start the show.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second annual Board and Committee Leadership Summit with the City Council. We're glad you could be here tonight. Last year, the focus, you may recall, was largely on project coordination. There's a lot of projects going on in the city, and that is definitely part of our plan for the evening that Kelly will be handling. But one thing that we've been thinking or wanting to do for some time is to have some sort of a board and committee orientation. And this might not, in the strictest sense, be an ultimate orientation, but we thought we would take this opportunity with our chairs in the room to start down a process that would get us to that point and streamline what it is you guys all do and what the city does with you. And so that's sort of the spirit of the evening, or the afternoon evening. So first of all, I think being the folks, Amy and I, this is Amy Aschenbrenner from the City Recorder's Office, being the folks who take minutes for council, it's extremely helpful when folks introduce themselves. So I thought we'd take a minute to go around the room. We'll start here, maybe on over that way, and say your name, the committee, and your committee role. And then once we get down to here, I would also appreciate our staff liaisons to say who they are. And audio recording in this room is always a crapshoot. So I'm not asking my colleagues to come to the table, but if you can speak really loudly, so at least everybody in the room can hear, the mics might be able to pick you up. So if we can just go around, introduce ourselves real quick, and start there.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathleen Brennan-Hunter, and I'm the chair of the tree board.
I'm Jason Price, and I'm the chair of the library board.
A. Adams, Milwaukee Arts Committee Chair.
Lisa Lashbrook, I'm actually the chair of the Parks and Rec Committee.
I'm Robert Massey, chair of the Planning Commission.
We have a couple of nameplates to update, and we'll be working on that.
Angel Falconer, council president.
Mark Gamba, mayor.
World Parks counselor.
Kathy Heisey, counselor, and since Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee is not here, I'll also mention that I am, and Audit Committee actually, I am the counselor that serves on both of those committees.
John Stahl, I'm chair of the budget committee. Our role is to spend a quarter once every 2 years, get the budget through, review the budget, and then once a quarter we need to review the financials.
Regis Negeman, Public Safety Advisory Committee Chair.
Ann Ober, city manager, and in disclosure, Lisa Beatty is excused from tonight's meeting, but was unable to attend.
Kelly Brooks, I'm the assistant city manager, and also I'm the staff liaison to PARB, our Parks Committee.
Scott Stoffer, city recorder, and along with my fantastic colleague Amy, who I'll let say her name.
Amy Aschenbrenner.
We oversee the board and committee recruitment, interviewing, and onboarding process generally.
Denny Egner, planning director, support the planning commission, and sometimes the DLC.
Steve Adams, city engineer. I'm liaison to the PSAC, and I'm co-liaison to CUAB.
Jennifer Backus, engineering technician of City of Milwaukee, and I also am staff liaison for the Public Safety Advisory Committee.
I'm Brett Kelver. I'm an associate planner with the city. I'm staff liaison to the DLC, or Design and Landmarks Committee.
Keith McClung, assistant finance director, audit committee, and second on the budget committee.
Jordan Nimlock, communication program manager and liaison for the arts committee.
Katie Newell, library director, liaison for the library board.
Thank you, everybody. Again, welcome, and glad you could make it here tonight. So study sessions by design are supposed to be pretty informal meetings. Council dives into a single or sometimes two topics, and so we do have a chair. We are running a meeting like it's a council meeting, but we do want to encourage discussion. So if you have questions, raise your hand or just make yourself know that you have a question, and can be a pretty informal atmosphere. Again, because we're audio recording in a room that's already pretty noisy, make sure if you're going to say a nice long statement and not just hoop and holler from the back row, if you can get close to the mic, that'd be appreciated for those of us who have to watch it for taking minutes and those who might want to watch it, tune in later, which would probably include Councilor Beatty, who's not here this evening. So our agenda, like I mentioned, we're taking the opportunity with our leaders in the room to kind of go over some basic functions of committees. But specifically, there have been 2 directives given to staff in the last year or 2 by our city council that we're using as the format for this evening. First and foremost, as all of you should know, in the fall of 2018, the city council adopted a code of conduct for boards and committees to members to review and to sign, to be familiar with. As a part of that council conversation, council asked staff to work on doing 2 things: streamlining the bylaws for our committees. We have about 11 or maybe sometimes 13 standing committees. They all have bylaws, which is the good news, but the shape and the form of those bylaws vary. Certain ones came to be in a certain era, and you can tell they had a same blueprint, but some just don't, and it'd be very helpful. The code of conduct was meant to be a stopgap and to help streamline expectations about committee member behavior and interaction with the public and each other and the staff and the council, so that helps inform it, and the code of conduct will definitely continue to be a thing that informs our bylaws. But one thing council wanted staff to do was to make it consistent across the spectrum. So this is part of that process. The other thing that they've asked us to do, which is a little bit a longer term thing, sort of related to our overall comprehensive plan review, is all of our committees, the standing committees, are mentioned in Chapter 2 of the Municipal Code. It's sort of a hodgepodge section. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason, not alphabetical. It's probably just they threw it in there as committees came to be. So eventually, discussions like this and feedback from you folks will go into creating a consistent template for bylaws for our committees and cleaning up the code, Chapter 2 in particular. So that's what we're going to do. To initiate that last fall, the staff liaisons started meeting and discussing how it is that they support the work that our committees do. And one of the things that Amy undertook was to do what we called a lay of the land. So we asked a bunch of these questions that are in this handout here that was with the staff report. There's copies on the table if you didn't get one. Just asking some basic questions about how committees operate and figuring out what it is we do, start to get a picture of where we are, and then as the city recorder's office, we kind of started to put together some recommendations what we should do, and the liaisons, happily to my surprise, this was quite the discussion. So I anticipate that, and completely welcome a discussion from the chairs if there's concerns, questions, comments about how committees function. I certainly welcome that, and we're going to use this lay of the land thing that we put together as our format. So I expect open dialogue and welcome that. Basically, it's asking what are we doing and what should we be doing. Once we get through that, we'll provide an update on current recruitment for our boards and committees. It's an ongoing process here at the City of Milwaukee, and so and there's some fairly complicated processes underway for some special committees that I'll provide updates to council on. And then we'll end with the topic that we had last year, which was Kelly will talk about updating project coordination. So that's where we're going. And and also this is sort of a nerdy announcement, so bear with staff for a minute. But council may be familiar that with a long-standing ongoing project that staff had, we had a volunteer database, which was an Access database, which if anyone knows about Microsoft Access, that's a dinosaur that died about a decade ago. But we were still running it until last year. We needed to replace that, and it took us a few years to get there, but we have done it. Very happily to report we have done it. The new software we have, the new system is called Onboard. And the coolest, there's 2 really cool things, and Amy, you can chime in if you have something to add, but not only is it a very easy to use database that we can share with all of our staff liaisons and colleagues in here, and it's not just locked down to a couple of people who know how to use a really old Access database, but so we have more staff who can help us run it, but it's public facing. So once we're building it, and once we launch it, it's a very cool way to it'll have the standard information. It'll have the Arts Committee and a little description about what the Arts Committee does, and has the current members. But as we add data, you'll be able to see for a position on council, you'll be able to track it all the way back for as much as we can put in terms of history. You can track the person's history, how long they've been there, when their terms are, where they are in their term. It's very functional, and it's very public-facing. And it also hosts our application process, which our staff liaisons are working on updating our application form. And so it's very cool. It's sort of the back end piece of that, but we finally did it. We replaced Access, and now we're on to Onboard. So that'll be rolled out, and I'm sure you all get announcements about that in the coming year, in the next few months. So if you have the handout there, we'll go through this. Some of these questions are pretty straightforward, and we asked these questions back before we kind of had an idea where we'd go. So some are going to be pretty obvious, like agendas. Who creates agendas? We asked our liaisons, and by and large, staff liaisons create the agenda with input from the chair. And then thinking about perhaps how the council operates and other committees, structures, that's probably pretty typical. I mean, the folks who organize the meetings and need logistically to know what needs to be prepared for your meeting, which would be the liaison, and the chair should be the ones running that. So the liaisons we didn't have any objections, and that's our recommendation, just as a functionality question. Any thoughts or concerns or comments about creating agendas? Who posts the agendas? Again, this one's pretty straightforward. Staff does, largely because we need it to be posted in a public place, and they're the ones with access to the website. So they also post the minutes on the city website. So those were both pretty straightforward. Any thoughts or questions about agendas generally? Perhaps the most important thing, this is the front end of the meeting, of course. This is what happens before you have your meeting. And we often get the question of how far in advance does an agenda need to be posted. The city's standard requirement or suggestion is 7 days in advance. That's a pretty good time to get the public to have a chance to review it. That's a weekend before your meeting so people can absorb it. State meeting law is not such a long period of time. The minimum is 24 hours for special meetings. And there's other language that says something about as most reasonable or as soon as practicable. But the standard for the city of Milwaukee is 7 days out. So hopefully, as chairs, you're talking to your liaisons, and as a once-a-month meeting, you should have enough time to have an agenda together and often case your packet and post it 7 days out. I know council has talked to committees about that in the past, and so 7 days is sort of our standard to meet those requirements.
And
Yeah.
Scott, you mentioned having us like standardized bylaws. Are you also thinking about standardized agenda form and minutes report form, which would be kind of quick and easy and simple to do?
Absolutely.
And they all end up being different, but nonetheless, if there's a standardized form.
Sure. And a whole nother course and could be on how to write minutes. And there's all kinds of information out there, and there's all kinds of perspectives on what is expected of a set of minutes. And we don't need to get into that here, but absolutely. I think having a standard agenda, having a standard minute template, and then perhaps one of the orientation topics we actually have for all who'd want to attend, but maybe in particular when we get down at board and commission secretaries or whoever's taking the minutes, that's absolutely something we could do. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so agendas, moving on to minutes. Who writes them? Interestingly, it's not what I have observed, but what I am told or hear is that most of our committee's secretaries are taking the minutes, which to jump to the recommendation, I think that's absolutely the right way. The minutes are, of course, the best part of any agenda, is approving the minutes, right? But they're very important, and they are telling the history and the story of what your committee is working on. And so I think it's very important that the committee own them. And that can put a lot of pressure on somebody writing a set of minutes, and there can be many wordsmith type folks who would say, well, you should have said this differently, and that you can get into that. But at the end of the day, when people are going to go look back and say, what did the budget committee say on this topic, which has happened, having a coherent set of minutes written by that body is important. And so I was delighted to see that most of our committee's secretaries are writing it. There's also a staff resource question when the staff liaisons spend time writing minutes. There's a question about the use of staff resources as well. And sometimes logistically, that's just how it falls out. Certain committees, the city council, the planning commission, and the budget committee are done by staff and will continue to be done by staff. But
I think, if you don't mind, the only addition I'd make to that is that the staff liaisons are often really engaged in the discussion. That's part of why it's hard for us to have the staff liaison taking the minutes, is because they're
Yep.
usually helping answer questions and get things through the agenda process. And so, please know that this isn't a statement of whether or not we should have someone there or whether or not that person should be providing you service. It's really just making sure that they're giving you the highest service. And for us, that means probably engaging and answering questions and being a resource to you in that way. It's hard to cover both sides of that.
yeah, absolutely.
On the Parks and Recreation Board, Kelly just recently asked for someone to step up, and they did, which was great. He seemed a little nervous. So I like the idea of having a standardized way to take minutes.
Yep.
Because that kind of takes the pressure off of someone and makes it a little bit easier for them to step up, because I noticed there's still 3, and maybe they will stay that way, but that are currently not filled, so.
I was wondering if the 3 included the planning commission, or if that was
It probably does.
in
And probably
addition.
the budget,
And budget.
Okay.
because the budget, we have Judy who helps us assist us because Bonnie is so involved. We're also involved in the
Right.
discussion. But we can get you the list. My guess is those are ones where we simply can't
We can't have.
someone else.
And
do
we don't
them.
have a
They're legally
secretary
obligated.
elected for it,
Yeah.
and so it's a different
I-
role.
Sorry. I know that both the Audit Committee and the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee rely on staff for their minutes.
And that might be some of them too.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I mean, the ones where there's legal requirements,
Yep. There's
there may
certain
be an argument.
functions and requirements that are going to have to be handled a certain way. But I think when there's like a situation like PARB, if it's possible and the liaison asks and it seems reasonable, I think absolutely that's where we should go when it's feasible.
Do any of the committees, or could they, I guess, use like a recorder,
Mhm.
and then they could transcribe from that? If it's a volunteer who wants to be engaged in the conversation, that might be a way where they could do both. And if the form is standardized, so that you're basically following an agenda and you
Mhm.
have space to write what happened under that item, then it's easier to track it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Even for, somebody who doesn't normally do that kind of thing.
The only thing I think absolutely right, because as you all know, all your meetings are public meetings. And the public can come and you can have members of the audience do that on their own volition if they're not recorded, like Budget Committee and Planning and Council are. The one thing I would suggest, if the secretary, whoever's going to do that, is going to do that, make a statement up front. This meeting is there's a sign when you walk into council meetings right there that says that you're walking into a recorded meeting. Just know that what you're saying is being entered into the public record. If you make that brief statement at the beginning and start audio recording, absolutely, for sure.
As we know too, just the audio recording can be difficult. And so it's important not to be solely relying on an audio recording as the secretary. I think it's probably good practice to make notes along
Yes,
the way.
for sure.
Yeah, just, I think helps facilitate things. Yeah, agreed.
All right, so who writes the minutes? Generally, our secretaries do. That should be the right way when feasible. Anything more on who writes the minutes? Concerns about that? Who are the minutes signed? This was an interesting discussion that created more discussion amongst liaisons than I would have expected. As you can see there, it's sort of split. 6 do sign, 4 don't. The chair signs, liaison, secretary. To me, the highest form of authority in the city is the city council, and the person who signs those minutes are the author, so it's usually Amy or I who sign them. So I think that's probably the best practice. I don't particularly have anything against a chair signing. It's not necessarily against any code or anything, but certainly I think it's a good practice to have someone sign. Probably the writer, at least. But I didn't have a strong opinion or recommendation that the chair versus the secretary. But if there's no concern either way, I would probably recommend that the person writing the minutes sign the approved minutes.
I would just add that if you are someone who's going back through minutes, having the author's identity revealed on the minutes can be really valuable, because if the minutes are unclear, you can ask them, well, is this what you meant, or is this what you meant? And they may not be able to answer you 10 years later, but at least it gives you a thread to follow.
Absolutely. It links back to transparency and accountability, for sure. So if I think the Planning Commission chair signs, and that's a practice I think planning commissions have.
We approve the minutes.
Yeah, there's
we don't sign them.
You don't sign them? No. I would encourage that maybe the staff who does to sign it.
Scott, for the Arts Committee, on the draft of the minutes, it says who has written the minutes. Is that what you mean by signing, or do they need a formal signature?
That's a good question. We typically, the practice has been to, you sign it and then you have a piece of paper, that's the minutes, it's paper, and then you probably get scanned and posted on the website and then put online. But it is 2020, and I think if there's different ways to sign electronically, and there's also concerns about privacy, about having someone's signature out in the public realm. So if the minutes reflect, there's ways to sign them electronically, I think. I'm not saying you have to print your sets of minutes for every single time, but I think somewhere, usually it's at the bottom that says, submitted, respectfully submitted by, or written by, or whatever phraseology, and that could be a standard thing on our, having some sort of digitally implanted, or if you want to sign or make your X there or whatever. I think it is helpful to actually have a signature of some kind. And that could be, if you have Adobe Pro, or actually maybe Reader, if you have Adobe, you can create a digital signature that way too, and that'll timestamp it as well. So.
Even for legal documents, you literally just have to put /your name, and that counts as long as you. I mean, if you're submitting that, if you're converting it to PDF and it's being posted on the website, no one's going to question whether or not that's actually legitimately you are the one signing that document. We can always deal with problems as they come. I don't think that anybody needs to go through any hoops or buy any certain specific software to electronically sign. I mean, that's my opinion.
Agreed. I'd agree. But I think it is important to have that final step, because then it's also a trigger to get it to staff so that we can post it online. Okay. Anything else on signing minutes? No. It's supposed to be archiving, not archiving. This is mostly an internal question. Ideally, once your meeting is over, you have an agenda and maybe any exhibits that form your packet, and then your approved minutes go into that packet and it gets posted online. With all the work that we're doing, it's not surprising that we're struggling to get that posted consistently, but that's more of an internal thing. Once we get posted online and then put into our HPRM, for those who don't know, is our digital archive system. It's a very robust system that we actually use. It's a state-run electronic records management system that there's a public facing. If you go to our website, the digital archives, that's where it is, and actually most of your minutes and agendas should be posted out there as well as on the website. But HPRM is our electronic record system. So, anything else on the exciting world of minutes? Let the minutes show that we're done talking about minutes. All right, meetings. This might be a little more interesting. So the first question we asked there is who leads the meetings. That was pretty obvious, chairs. Apparently, I don't remember who the committee was, but there was one liaison who generally ran the committee. I don't remember who that was, but generally chairs. That was pretty straightforward. This was an interesting one because it's something that the city council at retreat touched on in terms of agenda order, but public comments. Do you have a public comment part of your agenda? And that's formally and informally, and it's mixed, which I think is fair, because as agendas ebb and flow and different staff and different chairs come and go, that agendas without a template or
no standard form.
There's no standard form, they come and go. But my own observation of how things are trending in the city and in the world generally, when the public comes to our meetings, by and large, if they feel like they have something to say, they would like, they're looking for an opportunity to do that. So I think it's helpful to remember that first and foremost, chairs are the ones who run the meeting, and it's always at their discretion whether somebody can make comment. Technically speaking, this evening, if somebody wanted to address the city council on these topics, it's up to Mayor Gamba as the chair of the meeting to allow that to happen. By and large, council has by practice, but so it's important for chairs to remember that you do control the agenda during the meeting, and you control when the public is allowed to speak. Having said that, I think it's also a good idea if we start putting regular comment periods on your agendas. There's philosophical debates to be had, and council's sort of delving into this a little bit, where in your agenda you put public comments. If you're having a very hot topic, putting public comments, and there's a lot of people to talk, putting it at the beginning of your agenda could derail the rest of your agenda. Putting it at the end of your agenda, conversely, could cause frustration with those who are waiting to speak. You're waiting through all your other business. So there's pros and cons to where you put it, and without a template agenda, you're free at this point, I think, to work with your liaison, your chair, and ask your committees where you'd like to do that. But I would recommend that you have a part of your standing agenda, a public comment period. Probably most of the time, you'll have it, you'll look around, no one's gonna really wanna talk, and you'll move on. But I think it's an important transparency piece and expectation that Milwaukeeans certainly have when they come to a public meeting, that they'll have a chance to tell you, their representatives and leaders, what they think on a certain topic. So I recommend that. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions about that? It is sort of, can be opening a can of worms, or allowing a can of worms to be opened every single meeting. But by and large, I think it's the right way to trend. No? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
as we're talking about creating some sort of standardization, I think there would be some benefit to including the language that's on the council agenda around this topic, where, you know, if you as the chair feel the need to limit testimony to 2 minutes or 3
Yes.
minutes or what have you, then you also have that opportunity.
Absolutely. If you do have a very hot topic and you have a lot of people to speak, you don't have to let them go on and on ad nauseum. At council, the practice is 3 minutes per individual speaker, depending on the topic, and if it's a land use hearing, 6 to 10, sometimes 15 minutes for organizations or representatives of an applicant or whatever. So groups but that way you can catch a bunch of people into a certain group, a certain time frame, for sure. That's a good point.
And then maybe tips, especially for new chairs, on how to sort of rein it in if someone ignores the limit.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that we have on our agenda is a note to the public that we won't probably have any discussion with them that evening on it, that, you know, items need to be researched, and it may be the first time we've heard it or whatever, so that there's no expectation of dialogue. There can be, but it may often be that committees just want to hear somebody, just like often that's the way with us. We just want to hear it and not comment to it. And then if there's any comment, then that comes back at the next meeting, you know, back from the group.
I think we've developed an interest in a minutes orientation, and now perhaps an orientation for chairs. So absolutely. Okay. Anything else on comments? The next thing that it's a part that lands on your agendas at least annually, because the code asks or requires that all boards and committees check in with the council at least once a year, and every time that happens, a work plan is presented. So I don't think this needs to be overdone, but you do want to think about how your work plan is tracked. There's different ways to do that, and it probably depends on the chair and the staff liaison and how that's actually rolled out. But most of our committees do work on this at least once a year, and the recommendation is that that should be. I don't know if it needs to be done. You need to review the work plan every single meeting because you've got other things to do, but I definitely think that's something that should be part of your overall approach. So then moving on to leadership. Part of this is mostly a reminder to myself. Standardizing our template, our bylaw template, will mean that there'll be descriptions of different leadership roles on a committee. The chair is pretty standard. Sometimes there's a vice chair. secretary, sometimes there's a treasurer, the different functions, and so I don't have a whole lot there. The one thing I would say there is if you have any thoughts on what your bylaws say, you might want to think about, as the chairs, you might want to review what it says for you, and if you have any edits to make, that's something we'll do across the board. And then the other interesting discussion we got into on the liaison side was, when do you revisit your leadership? Some committees, the answers varied, and it can be interesting to think about because it's something that I don't know that we think about a lot. With the city council, every 2 years we'll know there's an election. So the code says every 2 years there's an election for a new council president after the seating of a new council. So that's sort of an obvious trigger when that happens. But for boards and committees, especially with our system of constantly filling vacancies and half the time people meet the end of their terms, and sometimes they leave before for various reasons. And so there's ongoing turnover. I think one model that I've seen seems to work fairly efficiently is the Planning Commission. I believe you guys touch your leadership and look at that once a year. And sometimes it changes and sometimes it doesn't. We're not advocating for overthrowing the chair every year, but certainly I think, and so it can be hard to choose when to do that. Yeah.
I have an observation. So on PSAC, so because of the neighborhood districts having representation on PSAC, so elections happen in the NDAs. I believe it's in the June, kind of like the last meeting before summer, and then PSAC elections are the following month, as the new members have been, or shortly, the meeting after city council has approved any new members, basically. So that kind of coincides with what the NDAs are doing.
Absolutely, and those NDA elections are probably why the PSAC committee terms end at the end of June. So yeah, that's an automatic. When you have that for the committees whose, I think there's 2 committees whose terms end in the end of June. Most of our committees' terms end at the end of March, which is coming up. So April could be a good time of year, or to give council time to make those appointments, perhaps May. Could be a good time of year for committees and it can be a fairly brief agenda item. I don't know if Planning Commission or Denny has any comments about how you handle the annual leadership check-in, but it could be just a very informal, we're starting a new term for some people, or the NDA's just had elections, or whatever that sort of natural trigger is. You could just say, does Robert still want to be chair, or having...
I think it's just travel, when we come to January and say it's time to pick someone new. It's pretty informal.
Yeah, and that'd be great. I think it would just be helpful to have that opportunity. And I think that the point has been made during previous Planning Commission changes. Chairing a meeting is an interesting perspective. I mean, being a member of a board and committee gives you insight into how things function city and community-wide, but being the one who's monitoring the agenda, monitoring the comments, I mean, it's an interesting and can be quite invaluable experience just to have. So I would encourage committees to think about that, think about those natural flow of the year. And again, we love our chairs. You guys do incredible, important work, and you're smart and critical people. And so we're not advocating that any of you give up the chair, but just as a function of our committees, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind.
With the Arts Committee, each March we ask, who wants to be in different roles. And each time we've been able to fill our roles, but this time I'll be leaving in a month, and that's when we normally would elect, because it's end of term for me. How do we transition between the different
when your
chairs?
chair leaves and then you're left without a that's a good question, and you're not going to be the only one.
Some committees have vice chairs.
Yeah.
Parb as an example.
We
Right.
do.
And so
We
when
do.
somebody-
Yeah, it's Hamid.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
They all have vice?
I don't know.
I don't think all have vice chairs, but certainly a vice chair would be a natural step. Or I think council was in a point back in 2015 that there hadn't been a council president election yet, and the mayor resigned. So there was a discussion at the very beginning of that first meeting. Someone had to decide who was going to chair the meeting. I think maybe Counselor Beatty
She was
chaired the
elected
meeting,
as
and then eventually she was
council
council president. So if there's no natural vice chair, I would say the first meeting after a chair is termed out, the committee would say, who wants to run this meeting? And you could take a vote, or someone just volunteer, say, I'll run the meeting until you can make your next selection. But that's the situation that several of our committees are going to be in. KGNC, CUAB, Arts are going to be, not library, but there's a number of people leaving library though, but
Audit.
audit, yeah, audit's going to be without a chair. So, very good point though. Okay, so that's meeting. Anything else about meetings and running meetings? We've got a good suggestion to do a meeting orientation for chairs. So, if there's nothing else on the lay of the land, I think this is very helpful. I appreciate this can be not as exciting to people outside the city recorder's office, but this is very helpful to creating the templates. So with that,
Just so you know, there was also a request during the conversation for Robert's Rules of Order to be a part of the training for the chairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Next steps with revising, we're approaching the bylaws first, and then we'll take what we learned from that process and review the code. But the liaisons are all listening intently and taking studious notes, and are going to revisit this. And then, I would expect over the next year, you will see a bylaws template roll out. I'd ask that because the way we adopt that, then we'll have a template, but then to implement it, each one of your committees is going to have to review it in your annual work plan review, prepping to come to council, and then ideally you'll take that and say, here's how our bylaws fit into the template. City council will have any discussions. There are undoubtedly going to be parts of the template bylaws that are going to be unique for each of the committees. They're just made up differently. There's different roles. So you'll hash it out with council, and then council will approve that. And so hopefully in a year from now, we'll start to be in the process of council approving standard template bylaws for everybody. And then after that, the year after that, once those are underway, we'll look at the code, which is a different process. So if you have any other thoughts on bylaws, templates, agendas, minutes, feel free to let me or Amy know, or your liaisons.
I'll just support, I think, what Lisa said in terms of if we're going to be doing more public comment. I think we need kind of a standardized approach, because you need to balance like being respectful to the person with managing the agenda, because if they start to go south, it's like, is this the time for that? So it's tough.
Yeah, and you have to have a good sense of read of the room, and it's also important. It's important for the chair to know, to be in control of that, but then also the other committee members to know what their role is, and when to adjourn a meet or to recess a meeting, to give a time for people to cool, or absolutely.
So we should probably talk about that at the training as well for the chairs, just to make sure that everybody feels confident in it. And the other piece, just going back to what Councilor Parks talked about, it really has proven very helpful for all of us to hear the public comment and then wait till the next meeting in order to make a response back, just to make sure that the right information is shared, and that we are able to get you the best information. So it is something I would encourage.
Absolutely. All right, thank you for that. Updates on recruiting. We are recruiting a lot of people right now. Someone once suggested it was north of 50. So I'll just start with the standing. We have 3 current openings on the Arts Committee, the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee, and the Planning Commission, but we are aware that there are, as of the end of March, there are quite a few more. We could have as many as 11, but I have started to hear back from some people whose terms are up that are eligible, that they are wanting to be reappointed, so that's coming, but we will have quite a few openings. And in the case of a committee like Kellogg Good Neighbor, there are going to be 4 positions open, with some long-standing members not being eligible to be reappointed. So that, I highly ask that you all recruit people, tell people. That information's on our website currently, which if you don't know where that is, you can go to MilwaukeeOregon.gov, and then you come over here, /BC, and you can find it under departments, boards, and commissions. That takes you here. This, by the way, is the page that'll be replaced by Onboard. This is our landing pages with descriptions of your committee. And if you ever have any edits you'd like to make to your description of your committee, route those to us through your liaison or to us, and we're happy to make them. But then if you were to click on current openings, we have 1, 2, 3 opening now. The library board, Katie is keen to get those filled as soon as possible. So we've already put the 2 that'll be open as of April 1st on there. And eventually soon we'll get the other ones that have April 1st as we confirm. But we're also recruiting for youth committee members and City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee and the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, Implementation Committee. So another reminder before I leave the general openings, we a couple years ago instituted a 6-month rule. So if you apply for a city committee after 6 months, we consider it to be expired. People move on, people's lives change and may not be interested. So if you haven't applied for a committee in 6 months, we encourage you to reapply. Okay, so I hope that, and I think our liaisons have done a good job of communicating to our boards and committees that the City Council directed at the end of 2019 to recruit youth members to be standing regular full voting committee members on 7 of our committees. And so since December, we've been working with our partners at Milwaukee High School, Rex Putnam High School, the Portland Waldorf School, LaSalle, to recruit members, to recruit youth applications for that. And we have got quite a few. And I'll say thank you to the Planning Commission Chair and Ann and Denny for joining us for this part of the meeting.
Scott, before I leave,
Yes.
one question. Is there a time limit that you would have on keeping an open position open, if in fact you had some applicants? Ideally, you'd like to have a lot of applicants, but if you only get 2, how long will you keep it open? Or should I say how long we have it open before you close it and actually go through an interview process?
If we have a single vacancy on a committee, then Amy and I communicate with the staff liaison. And generally for one position, I wouldn't want to form an interview panel unless we have at least 2, 3. So that's kind of what we wait for. That's our trigger, is how many applications we received. And sometimes that can take months. And sometimes so we just, we put it out there, we put it in the pilot, and to Jordan's credit, the pilot is an amazing tool. We always, the weekend it drops, the next week, we always get a number of applications. So we advertise in the pilot, we put on our website. We just need to work maybe better with committees to recruit. But so generally I'd like there to be options. So you're not just interviewing one person and feeling like you have to plug in that person.
Yeah, I understand that.
So,
if you have a couple, 3 applicants, how long do you keep it open before you close it?
if it's one position and we have 3 applications, I think usually the liaison and us would say, let's do an interview. And that process is one that Amy runs, and that involves figuring out when the city council, the chair, and the staff liaison are available. So that's one doodle poll to figure out scheduling. And then once we have that date set, then we start plugging in the applicants.
Okay. Thank you.
So there's, unfortunately, we don't have a set time. It's just as soon as we have the applications, then we can go.
Okay, thank you.
And we do work hard to do that, and we have a couple coming, couple interviews coming, because we've got a number of openings. Okay, so update on the youth. We recruited since December. We had first round interviews on Saturday. I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. First round interviews. We held them last Saturday. 8 students were interviewed. And then at the end of those eight interviews, the council members, which were Council President Faulkner and Councilor Heisey, felt that before appointments should be made, we maybe give an opportunity for a second round. There were a couple of students who couldn't attend last Saturday, scheduling. There have been 3 applications that we received since we scheduled those interviews. So there's a pool of at least like 6, 7 people, students, that could form the nucleus of another round of interviews. So the question to council on this front is, it's probably ideal to keep Angel and Kathy as the council members. So is council okay if staff proceed with scheduling with those folks, those two, a second round?
Sure.
The downside, we'll do it, I know you guys provided dates on Saturday and we'll work with that, but the downside is we're running then the risk of delaying when their terms would start, which were meant to coincide with most of our committee terms, which is April 1st, but if they don't start till mid-April or May 1st perhaps, just depending on when we can get this done, that's the risk we run. But I think their point with that there's more people to be looked at and included before we make any appointments is a good one. So I'm seeing no objection. We'll work to schedule a second round and we'll get those folks plugged in. Okay. All right. This could get a little complicated when I have a whole page of notes to give you an update on the City Hall, on the Blue Ribbon Committee, and the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. So I'll just start. Interrupt me when you have questions. City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee received, and the deadline for both these were yesterday. We received 25 applications. 3 were ineligible because they don't live in city limits and they don't have a tie to a business. And 4 of those applications were from the direct group, so Planning Commission, Historical Society, the school district, those folks who aren't going to be interviewed and be put forward. So that means we have 18 applications for the 8 neighborhood and the 1 business, downtown business seat. So 18,
Scott,
yes.
Can you briefly describe this?
Sure, yes, sorry. So the easy one maybe to describe now that Denny's left is for several years, the city's been undertaking a comprehensive plan review process, and it started with the visioning, and there was a comprehensive plan advisory committee that assisted the city in reviewing the package. And now there was a decision made to form a comprehensive plan implementation committee, which will do the next step in reviewing those updates and changes to the comprehensive plan. So that's the CPIC, this Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. And then, as I think most folks know, the city is in the process of acquiring a building on Main Street to be a new city hall. So that's a whole project in itself. But that leaves the question of what will be the next chapter in the story of our current city hall. And so to help discern those goals for that project and to help the city guide ourselves to the request for proposals for that project, a City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee is being formed. And back in December, November maybe, the City Council outlined who should be on those committees. They did that for Comp Plan and for City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee. In terms of City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee, there were a number of organizations that they felt that the council felt should have designated voices. That was the Milwaukee Historical Society, the North Clackamas School District, a number of committees including Design Landmark, Parks and Recreation, Arts, Tree. I don't have the list in front of me, but there were designated seats for those types of folks. And we've received, by and large, we've received all of those. Haven't heard of a council designee yet for that, but and then there was the 7 neighborhoods. Council wanted to make sure that all 7 of our neighborhoods had a voice, not necessarily through the NDAs, but they just want geographic representation of our neighborhoods. And then since it's a downtown entity, a downtown business owner or representative. So the 8 positions that need to be interviewed for the City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee are the neighborhood representatives and people who represent downtown businesses. So for those folks, we have 18 applications for those 8 spots. It's a little different calculus, and I'm not going to pretend like I know all the nuances for the CPIC, but it boils down to they had 29 applications, 4 from CPAC members. And so what that gets you to is you have 25 applications for up to 8 positions. So you have, doing math in my head, somewhere around 40, north of 40, 43 maybe, applications that need to be vetted for those 16 positions, appointments to be made between the 2 committees. So staff's recommendation, we had previously identified Saturday, February 22nd, the morning, as a good time for council to conduct these interviews for both CPIC and CHPRC. That's a lot of applications to get through, a lot of interviews to get through for that 4-hour window. So what staff's recommendation to council is We are going to ask council to review those applications and to vet them by indicating one of three options. Should they, we'd like to see if there's anybody who could be a direct appointment. So if you're looking at these applications and you think this person's maybe a no-brainer or whatever, put direct appointment. And if there's a majority of council that feels the same way for a direct appointment, then we'll just consider that someone who doesn't need to be interviewed.
So I assume we know which neighborhoods folks from the Blue Ribbon Committee are coming from.
Correct.
So for every one of those, that there is only one applicant from a given neighborhood, I would say those are direct appointments.
There's one neighborhood that has that situation.
Of course there is.
One that has one,
Yeah.
Only one. I will report Llewellyn and Hector Campbell. We don't have anybody who met that. Just didn't have a business, wasn't representing one of the other designated groups. So Llewellyn and Hector Campbell, we didn't get any applications from there. But Ardenwald had 5, Island Station 3. There's a couple that 3 and 4. Lake Road has 1. So what I'm hearing you say, Mr. Mayor, is that you're suggesting that the one person who is from Lake Road, just automatic?
Automatically in.
Is that?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. That makes that easy.
That only takes care of
Save
one.
one application that we have to review. I mean, I like the recommendation. I think we review the applications and
Yep.
we make some.
We have packets and we'll email Councilor Beatty. We'll send you all available. So if you could vet them, if there's somebody who's a direct appointment, and the City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee are grouped into those 3. So the packet is got a score sheet on the top for each of the groups, and you can tell us if you think it should be a direct appointment, if you'd like to have an interview, or maybe not to consider it this time. So if that's okay with council, we'll hand those packets to you this evening. Thinking logistically, we'll just have to see how this
By
shakes.
email is how we'll get those packets?
You will, but we also have paper for you. So I know. But they will be emailed to you as well. Thinking logistically, how we structure the 22nd, and this is where it could get complicated, so please, someone jump in if I'm. A single committee can get through 12 15-minute interviews in a 4-hour period. We have potentially, over 40. You're going to vet some, potentially vet some out. If we can aim to have for each committee 12 interviews, then we could get it done in that 4-hour window. If council's also okay running 2 simultaneous interview panels. The interview panel for the City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee is going to include the council representative and myself and Allison Wicks. The CPIC panel will be the council representatives and Denny and David and maybe Vera, because Vera's taking a part of that too. Is that right? Yeah. So there's staff that are going to be involved. What I would like to know from council is I think we have 3 of you, I think Mr. Mayor and Wilda.
I think it's Lisa and myself, and I thought it was Kathy.
Kathy's not available.
No, so it must be, is that you? Is it
And I
you?
think
Yeah.
Lisa is available as well.
So it's Lisa and yeah, because remember Lisa was in that group. Lisa, myself, and Mark. Yeah.
If one of the committees only had 1 member of council on the panel, is that okay?
Sure.
Do you have a preference between the 2? Which would have the 1 and the 2? Since there are 3 of you available, do you have a preference?
Probably the Blue Ribbon panel,
Would-
one would have the 1.
With the other one?
I'm not sure what my conflict might have been before, but I do have some availability on February 22nd.
From 8
There
to
you
12?
go. So you got 2 and 2.
So now we got 2.
Oh, then never mind.
Yeah.
Wait,
I mean, I
find
must have
yourself
had
4
a,
hours of work.
sorry, I might have just messed something up.
We asked last year, so this is the struggle with setting up interviews. It's just people's schedule. Okay, so we'll have 2. Do you want us just to assign, or do you have a preference as to who goes to which panels?
I think, personally, perhaps, so you guys give me feedback, the people that have been most involved with with the comp plan should continue with that. The other is kind of a wide open, more architectural, historic, community development, economic development kind of thing. It's different.
Sure.
Different focus. Yeah, so,
You did say Vera's gonna be there, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So if we have Vera, we're in the CPIC.
I just understood she is leading CPIC, so I think she needs to be there.
That's what I would.
Yeah.
That's what I've been, that's my understanding.
Okay, thanks.
okay.
So,
So Lisa and I on CPIC with Vera.
And then Angel and I
Angel
on
and
Sure.
City Hall.
cool.
Okay.
Great. Well, then we'll have a 12-hour interview party. Sorry, 4-hour interview party.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
The goal will be to get to no more than 12 interviews then per committee. And that's back to back to back to back for 4 straight hours on that Saturday morning. So we'll hand those to you. You guys will vet direct appointment, interview, or not to be considered at this time. Because this is a 3-day weekend and because we're asking folks to come in a week from this Saturday, if council can get those back to staff by noon this Friday, that would be ever so helpful. And I know that's asking a lot of reading. Okay, so that answers my question. Concurrent panels. We got 4 counselors. So ideally on the 24th, which is a Monday, we will have a slate of folks, or that week there, we'll have a slate of folks, and this is on council's March 3rd agenda to make those appointments. So that we can start, so they can start meeting forthwith.
Yeah,
That took a lot of time to get to that point, and I apologize. But overall, there's just a lot going on, and we're getting a lot of things stood up. So appreciate you bearing with us on that one. If anybody has any questions about that stuff? No?
Thank you, council, for making your Saturday morning available.
Guess it's better than TV on
My turn?
Kelly's turn.
laundry.
Okay.
Like that.
It's my turn.
it's
Will you pass
exciting.
that around for me? So while this is the document I'm going to talk from, but before I do that, I actually wanted to give the mayor a chance. Last year, I believe we asked you to share what the council goals were with you all, and we didn't really put that on the agenda. So it won't take long, but would you mind just recapping for the chairs what the council's 3 goals for the year are?
Sure, and why it matters.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure you're all aware that we did a visioning process a few years back, and then we did a climate action plan, and then now we're doing the comp plan. The purpose of that whole process is so that we're all pulling in the same direction. To have the city, every one of us, every committee, every commission, every neighborhood, ideally, roughly, pulling in the same direction. The 3 council goals are still climate action, housing affordability, and community engagement, which is, I'm going to let Kelly explain that one. And I know it might feel like some of those goals are irrelevant to the committee you sit on, and I'll give you an example of why maybe not. So, for example, the library might think, well, what do we have to do with climate action, for example? We've got an efficient building, we're good to go, but one of the biggest climate impacts that we learned about when we did our climate action plan is all the stuff people buy. One of the only actions we are actually taking in the city to address that is our library of things. So people can come in and borrow a thing instead of going out and buying one and sticking it up on their shelf or in their garage for the next 3 years and then using it. They've got that. So every committee and every commission will probably have some way that they can address or put some effort towards solving climate change and housing affordability. So I guess I would offer that it might behoove the committees to review those documents, just to have a sense of what's in each of them, and have that in your mind as you're making decisions about the various things that you do. What could we do on our committee, I mean, right, to move in the right direction on each of those? I'm going to let Kelly talk about.
Can I add one more reading assignment? The housing affordability strategy is another document that came after vision, so.
Yep.
That would be if.
I agree. I meant to mention that, actually.
Sure. Yes, community engagement is the third goal this year, and it's a unique in that it's a kind of an overarching goal. So part of the reason why we generated this list last year and why we're going to keep talking about it this year is because there are a lot of projects and a lot of things underway in the city, and how we continue to move towards the vision and fully engaging everyone who lives here in a meaningful way while moving this many things forward means that we have to get sharper in how and when we engage with the community and all the different platforms. You won't see specific community engagement projects because right now the approach that we're taking to that is we actually have all of you. We have our NDAs, we have council meetings, we have events, we have our website. We have a lot of different ways that we engage with people, but what we're working on is training and standardizing how we engage to kind of improve all of those different platforms. So it's really critical, but oftentimes feels a little more behind the scenes. You may start to hear things talked about a little bit differently in terms of whether we say coordinate or collaborate or empower. But also, anytime you have a question about what the engagement goal is, please call me if there's a particular facet of engagement that your committee would like to be engaged in or want to know more about. I'm happy to come talk anytime about that. So I'm going to explain why we have this list, and then I'm going to explain all the ways in which this list is kind of deficient, and what I hope you'll do with it. It's definitely still in draft form. It is definitely still incomplete. We were working on it I've been working on it up until a couple days ago, which is why I brought it to you at this meeting. And what I'm hoping you'll do is you'll take it from here and you'll talk to your staff liaisons and see, it's just a place where you're like, hey, why isn't this on here, or should it be here, or this is showing up as being a tree board thing, but I really thought it was a PARB thing. And then that can facilitate either cross-communication between two different boards or task forces, or just better communication between you and your staff liaison if that's needed. So the way it was broken out last year, and I kept it the same, we have housing affordability, Milwaukee Bay Park, and climate action. What you'll see next is the primary city department. So CD, and there's a long list of acronyms on the back side, but CD is community development. Office of City Manager is OCM. I'm actually attempting to start switching that over to the strategic engagement team because everyone knows who Ann is, but they don't really know what we do in that office. It happens to be where our engagement and communication staff are. So if it's that, we'll call it the strategic engagement team to try to make that more clear. So you'll see the primary city department. Then there's this column, CIP policy or event process, which was the best we could come up with last year to try to tell you whether or not you were involving yourself in a development of a policy, or you're really talking about a capital project or an event. So, and the reason for that is the level of engagement that you can have in a capital project is different than development of a policy, particularly wherever you're at in the life cycle of that project. So if you're designing the project, you can have a lot of input. If it's in construction, you mainly just need to know it's coming, right? And how it's going to impact your life. So that was us trying to help give people a sense of what type of process this is. The last column is kind of the most important one, I would say, for you guys. So it's kind of my fault that we have this. So when I got to PARB, I was confused. I was confused about what PARB was doing versus what Tree Board was doing versus what the Climate Action Plan Task Force was doing. I just wasn't sure who had what. And so I was like, can we have a list of who's doing what? And so one place where that clarity helped was around, we had Arbor Day and Earth Day, an event, and PARB had always done it. And then we didn't have a tree board, and then it was Arbor Day, and then we were splitting Arbor Day and Earth Day up, but we weren't quite sure who was going to take what. So this list for us last year did that. It said, tree board, you have Arbor Day. PARB, you have Earth Day. And it was super helpful to me because then I knew that, going into the year. So this isn't like, I don't have First Friday on here because nobody's really confused about who does it. Like the Arts Committee, I mean, you know, so that's why you won't see your whole work plan here. And there'll be projects that you're wondering about that you may not see. If it felt really clear, I didn't put it on. What my hope is that any of the ones where there's some overlap can live here so that there's less confusion about who's got what. An evolution from last year, I think I had PSAC is pretty much primary on every SAFE project because everything we'd done with SAFE had been really programmatic. And PSAC is definitely still the home of the program. It's also still very interested in various SAFE projects, but what we're finding as we're going out and actually building them is our NDAs kind of become more on point, right? Because oftentimes that NDA is meeting right down the street from the impact from the project, right? So we're evolving kind of, that's why some of them look the way that they look, but there may be, I'm certain there are projects that are on PSAC's radar that I don't have listed. And so if you could chat with Steve and Jennifer about that as a group, if there's something we're not seeing, or if you thought, oh no, I see NDAs, but we actually are still having active conversations about that, please don't drop us. I am okay having the doubling up of neighborhood associations and committees and task forces, because they oftentimes overlap. The place this was aiming to get was when I had overlap between two committees. Now, another exception I'm making though, whoo, there's a siren, is the planning commission could be on like half of these, especially the policy ones. I don't have them listed not because ultimately the planning commission might not be, might be the decider on this one, or because there is a policy committee formulating work before it goes to the planning commission. So the comp plan implementation committee, for example, right? I just listed them, even though a lot of that work is code work that will go to the planning commission. All that's my way of saying, if you have ideas about how this could work better, or if you're like, this is great for you, Kelly, and it's a great staff tool, but we don't need to talk about it anymore, that's really good input for me too. Otherwise, my plan is to kind of just keep coming back at least once a year and showing you from at least the staff perspective where we think things are sitting. The other thing I just want to add is just because I'm listing one entity does not mean that's the entirety of an engagement plan for that project. So I could be showing the NDA as on point for a specific SAFE project, but we have 3 open houses in which we're inviting a much broader list of people, so this is, again, it's not everybody, but it should help point us to if one group should be on point. One that I should have on this list, which is another good example, and all my examples are PARB, and I'm sorry, but that's the one I know the best, is Dogwood Park. So we're doing some design work. Do I have it on there?
No, I just wrote
yeah.
that across here. Dogwood.
Yeah, so I need to add it. So we have Dogwood Park, and so what we did is we talked about, so PARB is the home of that conversation. We add it to the PARB agenda, but we invite historic NDA, the farmer's market, the daycare center who's interested. I mean, we reach out and then invite people to that table to have the conversation. So it is helpful to me. It's been helpful to me. It's still in draft form. But does it make sense what it's supposed to be? Okay. Is that okay? Do you think that you could go talk to your liaisons about what's on here and see what you think might be missing? I want to make a couple corrections. One thing I realized I wrote CHBRC, and I didn't explain it, but then Scott talked about it. So on the back, that's the City Hall Blue Ribbon Committee, is what that is. And then I have under Carefree Sundays, we did have an Open Streets task force before when we were trying to formulate the event. it has transitioned for us into more working directly with the neighborhood district associations that are on the route. We're finding that to be the most effective way to engage and get the programming for that event pulled together. So I don't expect we're gonna have that task force, so I'm gonna scratch that off and put NDAs instead.
I will note
Yeah.
that you also have DLC on here with that
Okay.
noted at the bottom.
Thank you. It's also in pseudo alphabetical order, because I don't know how to sort these tables very well. So I'll fix that too.
So how will the new route be determined for the Open Streets event before you know which NDAs are engaged in it?
So the route for that event is, I think when we talked about it before, we're intending to keep it largely the same. So our route input would be from you guys, to be frank. I mean, the route, to my knowledge, is expected to be largely the same as it was last year. And we would get input from council directly on route if we were gonna have variables. And then we would go from there and engage the programming, but we weren't gonna go ask everybody what the route should be every year. The plan is to have a pretty consistent route. So that's why the task force was really good last year, was to try to get up and running.
When did that change?
I don't know.
Because I attended the first several of those meetings, and the concept was that this year we'll do the route here, and the next year we'll feature these two neighborhoods, and then next year we might do this. The idea was to sort of let people explore different bike ped opportunities in the different neighborhoods.
And I apologize if that was like that. The last presentation I remember from Jason when we recapped the event in terms of where we're headed for 2020 was to do it again.
It may be that they want to do 2 years in a row on the same route, but not forever.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it has to be forever. No.
So then there'll be so basically what you're saying is the council will figure out what the route's gonna be.
Yeah, and I think honestly some guidance too from you all in terms of the level of engagement. When are you wanting to revisit the route? I think that would be a good next topic. We would recommend that you don't for the next year, and can give you reasons, and we can talk about that. And when your hope would be to revisit or change the route, and then we can talk about what kind of group we'd want to engage for that. That may require standing up a group.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's all I wanted to say. And then I wanted to stop talking and see what you think about this list, and if you would mind taking it back and just checking in with.
I think it's an excellent management tool. As I said last year, it's a good way to coordinate between management and volunteer coordinators. It seems to be kind of fluid, so the question is, how often do you update it and get it out to us? Is it once a year, or maybe once every 6 months?
It's once a year right now. And when I asked Anne about it, part of the reason why she likes it is me giving it to you does this update. I mean, so we sit down and we talk about it and review it, and there are things that change throughout the course of the year that wouldn't be reflected here. But this gives us at least that 1 year snapshot to be communicating with all of you about what we're seeing coming, and that way, if it's affecting your work plans or you see something in your work plan that's not reflected here, we can talk about it.
I know that as a member of PARB for a long time, I felt some frustration about overlapping stuff that wasn't clear, and I'm glad that your confusion helped clarify that. So thank you for being confused. It really was helpful.
Good. So I feel bad. I would have given it to you earlier, and then you would have all kinds of edits for me right now. But I expect right now you'd probably like to spend some time with it and review it with the rest of your members. And so if you can do that, and just in a month, whenever your next meeting, if you have feedback, I'll take that from your liaisons.
Thanks, Kelly. I have a question.
Yes.
I can definitely do that.
Okay.
And so I'll talk about it with Peter. I know he's
Yeah.
able to be here this evening. But one of the things looking at this list that comes to mind for me is we know, for example, with the tree board, we have aspirations about investments in trees and canopy in the city of Milwaukee that are probably beyond our current resources. So we've been talking about grants and other funding opportunities. And looking at the list, there's certainly probably some overlap, definitely at least with public opportunities in the region and maybe at the state level too. And where do conversations about funding and resources and grants and especially any that might impact potentially more than one project, where do those happen in the city? And if that's a better question to answer at a different time, that's fine.
No, I think that's a great question. I would say my knee-jerk reaction, if it's city resources, I would turn to my friends in the budget committee in terms of that's the place where we're talking about what the city is budgeting, and sometimes those documents do reflect grants we hope to obtain. So that is a place that you can see some of that. In terms of coordination on grants themselves, for this list, I would only really want it if we thought there was gonna be potentially a competing proposal from another board. So if the tree board wanted to go for a Metro Nature and Neighborhoods grant, which I don't think you do, but if you did, then we would need to talk, and I would need to coordinate that with the Parks and Recreation Board, because I've been talking to them about what the parks priorities would be, and that to me is a parks funding source. So I would say, when in doubt, maybe check with Peter and see if you're going for something that sounds like it might be following into like a parks resource. So that's one way to do it. But if there's no competing entity, then you can probably just work with your staff liaison, and then your staff liaison can figure that out for you. Is there one capital project you saw, or one on here that you thought might be a conflict? Or complementary?
Yeah, more complementary than anything
Yeah.
else. Well, one that I've mentioned to Peter, we haven't had a chance to talk about, actually, I might have mentioned this to Mayor Gamba as well, is Hillside Manor Master Plan and some of our tree planting goals.
Yeah.
And might there be some public funding that the city is potentially eligible for, that by looking at things more comprehensively might be more competitive? And so I've been talking to Peter, and we can keep talking about it with him, but
I
trying to
think
about those types of opportunities, and if there's ways to position projects together. I mean, I think this is really useful for that. Are there ways to think synergistically about opportunities?
No, that's a good example. So that would be kind of perfect, right? So you're thinking about something that is living in a different area, but that you would like to add trees to it. And what I'm saying is dream about tree, think about that. We love to find and leverage other resources of money, but you would go to that table and go talk and say, hey, we've got this idea, we're hoping to do this, what do you think? Rather than kind of have a separate tree board conversation and invite them to it. You would take that there. And you can also always, I am probably the closest that you're gonna get to a repository of people looking for grants in the city. So you can always email me, and I might have an idea. We're pretty intentional about taking those things to council, because council actually has to accept any money that we receive, so we try to talk to them, so that we're not going out and getting funds that then they would later not want to actually receive. That can be a real problem. So we do have a lot of direct council conversations about grants, definitely over a certain level. But I'd say, just start. It sounds like you're starting with your staff liaison to identify if there might be another entity already doing something, and then coordinating with them.
Thanks.
Do you guys want to add anything to that, or is that, okay?
Well, and I think that definitely if you're thinking, like, for example, the canopy goal, our 3 goals come theoretically with 2 things. 1, they come with a staff member, and 2, they come with funding to some degree or another. The tree canopy falls into that realm. So I'm fairly certain there's money in Peter's budget right now towards the tree canopy. But that budget conversation is going to be starting in March?
Soon.
So be engaged. The art committee was engaged last year, wasn't it, when we were talking about murals? So that's a time to be engaged at the budget committee level, to make sure to, advocate for the line item.
I would also point you to so Arts Committee actually does a lot with grants. I would say they seek out grant funding have in the past, I think. And so they have experience with how you all have worked through those issues too, that might just be helpful.
I think that as we look to this next year, we plan out quarterly, like how we're going to approach grants. That might be a direction for you guys too, to stagger it, not try and do it all at once, because it can be kind of time consuming. Yeah.
Any other thoughts about this for now? Thank you for coming again and for engaging. It definitely helps us bring the right information to you all at the right time when we can kind of traffic control right up at the beginning of the year. So we really appreciate you looking it over.
Okay, is that everything that staff has? Questions? Any other random questions in this? I mean, when we originally conceived of doing this summit, it was so that we would maybe be a little less siloized in all of our committees and commissions, and that there might be some cross-pollination on ideas or solutions or whatever. So this is kind of that opportunity. I imagined it a little more free-form when I imagined it, and so we haven't really done that, and I don't know if folks have other things they want to throw out, or it is, no, everyone's tired, wants to go home.
How many, I don't really know how many boards and commissions there are, or committees. Because it seems like it's poorly represented, you know?
It varies depending on this. We've got standing committees, and then we've got, sort of things like CPAC, where they're around for 2 years and then they're gone. So that number fluctuates. But I think standing committees, what do we have, 13 or?
We have 11 standing committees. We have 11 standing committees. And then at any one time, we have task forces. I think the Visioning Task Force, the Library Construction Task Force.
Climate Action Plan. The CPAC, the CTOG, the Construction Excise Tax Oversight Group. It can get higher, 15, 16, 17. But there are 11 standing committees that are named in the code and are regularly appointed to by council.
I have a question about the youth component that we're introducing into our committees. At present, we have, for the Arts Committee, 9 members, so that there's always a final vote, right? With bringing in the youth, that brings it to an even number. They're voting members, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how do we manage that if we end up with results that don't lead to a final decision? Like if we do a vote and it's even, what do we do at that point?
Aren't we appointing 2?
We're appointing 2.
So it'll
Oh,
still
okay.
be, yeah.
Up to 2. Up to 2.
Easy. We're hoping for 2, and I think what we're learning through the interviews is that we're hoping that we definitely want 2, and so I think even though people checked certain boxes in their applications, we're realizing that once we actually start talking with them about what their real interests are and how they might fit into a committee, that I think we'll be able to actually slide 2 people onto. And so there might be committees and boards that don't have youth representation right away. Some of the committees are just, once you actually start talking to, these potential youth members about what the work actually is, some of the interest tends to fall somewhere else.
It's pretty clear with the Arts Committee, though.
Yeah.
But to be honest, we struggled with how we might structure this as a pilot program. Council is very keen on making sure that these youth members are full-fledged voting and do affect quorum. We're not sure how that's exactly going to play out. We really don't want to put our committees in the position, especially some of the smaller committees. DLC is probably the example. There are 5 committee members. We're adding 2. Summertime, vacation time. We don't really want to put the committee in the position where it's going to not be able to function because of this. So we're conscious of that. We don't have a very good answer, except for we're going to monitor it. We've instilled as much as we can into the youth members being appointed that this is serious and that we'll expect to have the same expectations as the adult standing members do. And then we'll revisit it next year And so I hope the tale we can tell a year from now, when we're getting ready to revisit that program, is that it actually wasn't that big of a deal and quorum wasn't a thing. And but it's absolutely something we all have to monitor. And so as this goes along, if you're on a committee, which I think Budget Committee is not getting anybody, but the rest of you will be getting youth members. And I think we've had at least an application for everything, for each position, each committee. It's something we're watching. And if you have feedback as this plays out over the next year, we are very interested in hearing what you have to say. And of course, this is all future looking, but yeah.
And of course, the positions aren't replacing other positions, so there shouldn't really be much of a quorum concern unless other people aren't showing up as well.
That's where I was going to go.
That's true.
So this may actually force a conversation that you've been able to just politely ignore if you have members that are consistently not showing up. And all of a sudden now in the summer, you've got your students not showing up maybe, and that is causing you to not have quorum. That might be an opportunity, a time to have a conversation with people who aren't showing up regularly and saying, look, you've got to make a call here. You either need to show up or you need to resign so that we can get somebody in here that can come. So it's going to probably, on some committees, force a question that people just kind of politely let go because they don't want to make anybody mad or whatever. This is a commitment. When people sign up to do these things, they really need to try and do it to the best of their ability. And I know life gets busy, but
Will we have different rules for the youth at all? Okay.
no, that's so what we really talked about this, and a lot of cities have a youth council or they have a youth advisory board or something like this, and it really tends to be this very great, thanks for your input. It's great to hear from the youth.
Yeah.
Keep being youth.
It's not necessarily informing
Right.
all of the aspects of the work that we're all doing.
And it's not treating them, I think, with the respect
Right.
that what we were after was to really honestly say, you kids are now part of the decision-making process. You literally are getting to make decisions. You are a voting member. Because I found personally with youth that when they are treated with that kind of respect, they tend to behave that way. And I think it's a real opportunity for the city to engage with our young people. A lot of the decisions we make in our committees and our commissions are things that, many of us will be moved out of town or on doing different things by the time the effect is actually felt of that decision. But a lot of these young people won't be. They will still be here. So those are kind of the philosophical ideas that we had around actually putting kids on these committees to help make decisions that will affect their future.
And to that point, that code of conduct that's been in place for a year and a few months, those rules apply, and they have a 25%, if you're missed 25% of meetings in a given year, then that's grounds for council to remove a member. And that would apply to those students as well.
And I guess I would also take the opportunity, since we have a number of the chairs here, to just keep in mind in April, May, when these youth appointees are coming, that you might want to think about your agendas a little differently, to make space to welcome them, and be prepared to figure out how to integrate them. They come with a totally different knowledge base than the folks that have been on your committees for a long time do, but they do come with knowledge. And it's just going to be, I think, for some committees, not all, but for some committees, there will be sort of a how do we teach each other our languages? If you've got fairly technical stuff you're working with, or even the language of grants and grant making, some of that stuff that we all assume we all understand, you may have to spend a little time spelling out. So I just encourage you all to be open to that and prepared for it in those months.
We intend, especially for this first pilot group, we intend to orient the group of students who come on. So if there's anything that you think would be particularly helpful for us to emphasize when we welcome them as a group and then send them out to your committees. we'd be open to take any notes, talk about this or that, or we plan to do that and check in with them throughout the year.
Yeah, periodic check-ins where they can come together. Part of the, I think, the desire for them to be part of having two on each board is to better ensure success for the committee members, so that they don't feel like they're the only youth sitting on an all-adult committee, but also providing the opportunity similar to this, but sort of a youth summit, periodic check-ins with all of them where they can come together and talk about the various work that's being done on these committees.
We have a high school student who started coming to our NDA meeting a couple of years ago, and I think I'm going to check in with him because in the beginning he was sort of being brought there by his older brother, and reluctantly, and now he is very engaged. He takes part in all of our conversations, and he has come up with some fantastic ideas to direct, even Solstice. He had some great ideas. So I would like to hear from him. How did you go from the guy who didn't want to be there to, and how maybe he can teach us something about this process. I don't know.
Has he applied for any of these?
I don't know. I just read some notes about it because he's something.
Or maybe he'd like to be vice chair of your NDA.
We do have one. It's not me.
Oh, I couldn't remember. I thought you were still vice chair.
No. The other Lisa left, so another Lisa had to step up.
It's the way of the Lisas.
That's the rule in part.
in part, right.
Yeah.
So it needs to be in the bylaws.
Standard bylaws.
All right. Anybody, anything else? Awesome. Well, in that case, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So much. Did you have a project question?